Mike? Yes, you may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Mike Rodriguez, the Associate Secretary of Student Support at the Delaware Department of Education, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the final Delaware COVID-19 Health and Wellness Working Group meeting. This June 30th, 2020 meeting is being called to order at 5 p.m. This meeting is being held electronically. On March 12, 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to a public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including the Delaware COVID-19 Health and Wellness Reopening Work Group, to be conducted electronically, either by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including the information on how to access the meeting electronically, was published on June 23, 2020 on the state public meeting calendar site. Individuals may participate in this meeting via the DOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda. These meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have voice, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or via voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective work groups for review and posted on DOE's website as well. Each week, public comment is compiled from the previous week and posted online. A copy is also provided to the work group chairs to then share overall themes related to the responses that may impact the work at hand. We encourage working group members to review these comments online before each meeting. In summary, as we look at the public comment this week, there are still conflicting opinions on many of the public health factors, including the use of masks. Again, parents and educators alike vary in their opinions on whether or not students should return to school in the fall. Next slide. So here's tonight's agenda. In an effort to maximize the committee's time and ensure we review all the draft recommendations in the allotted time, we will once again do a quick roll call and are welcome to memorialize which committee members are present this evening. Next, we will provide a recap of the assignment. We will then close the evening with a review of next steps in the process. Next slide, Patrick. Again, my name is Mike Rodriguez, and I am co-chairing this committee along with Dr. Megan Walls, with the assistance from our Opportunity Lab partner, Dr. Mario Ramirez. We would all like to welcome the committee to our final Health and Wellness meeting. We will now take roll call of the members in attendance. When your name is called, please respond with here or present. Jackie?
Thank you, Mike. Good evening. Megan Walls. Kevin Fitzgerald. Thank you. Kevin Fitzgerald.
Here.
Laretha Odimoso.
Here.
Susan Haberstroh.
Here.
Stacy Greenlee.
Here.
Dana Carr.
Here.
Sue Smith.
Here.
Emma Brower.
Here.
Emma, thank you. Daphne Conwright.
Here.
Maricel Santiago. We have an apology from Reverend Powell this evening. Valerie Longhurst. Michael Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Anthony Del Collo. Laura Sturgeon. Kristen Dwyer. Kristen.
Here.
Thank you. And Mario Ramirez.
Present.
Thank you. So we are missing Maricel Santiago and Valerie Longhurst and Anthony Del Collo.
Marisol's here.
Hi, Maricel. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Jackie.
You're
Next
welcome.
slide. Again, public comment is welcome. To date, we have received approximately 230 public comments. Public comment can be submitted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or via voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments will be posted on DDOE's reopening page, and the link is provided there for your convenience. And for public members, all meeting materials are located on the public meeting calendar for your convenience. The public will have until Friday, July 3rd to submit all public comment. Next slide. So again, tonight we'll be reviewing the draft recommendation of 3 scenarios before our committee makes final recommendations to Secretary Bunting. Please remember to use the raise hand feature if you wish to participate and to lower your hand after you speak. As a reminder, the following norms will help ensure we stay focused and have a thorough discussion of the draft recommendations. Please remember that everyone has voice, respect all opinions, and honor the multiple perspectives of all those around the table. Please stay focused on our goal through the lens of health and wellness. Be succinct, and please keep in mind that compromises may be necessary. Next slide. Okay, so before we dig into the draft recommendations, Megan and I would like to thank the members of the Health and Wellness Committee for all your time and dedication to this very difficult task. Our job as a committee was to provide Secretary Bunting with recommended guidance that we thought was both feasible for schools and protected the health and safety of staff and students. Over the last 5 weeks, we have engaged in robust discussion around the 3 scenarios, and we also received a lot of community feedback, as well as DPH guidance that helped shape the document we will be reviewing today. As you will see, much of the feedback and guidance that was provided has been integrated into the document. The collective voices of this committee and our community have allowed us to develop recommendations that will help keep Delaware students and staff safe and healthy. This is a true strength. I thank you on behalf of the Secretary and most importantly, the students of Delaware for your active engagement and participation in this process. After our meeting tonight, we will make final edits to our work and then forward the health and wellness documents to the Secretary for her review. Each work group's final document will be posted to the public website. These recommendations will be used to support the development of Delaware's reopening schools guidance that is to be released the week of July 13th. So now to tonight's work. Francis, can you please put up the document?
Thanks, Mike. So we wanted to start here on scenario 2. We know that we spent quite a lot of time reviewing scenario 1 and hearing your feedback and integrating that feedback into the written document. So in the interest of time and making sure that we have time to get through this most difficult scenario, we wanted to start with scenario 2, and certainly towards the end, if there are comments on back to 1, we can get those in, but wanted to start with scenario 2. So the very first section on here, as you can see, is this final mental and social emotional health section, which includes, as Patches is kind of going between both the do before the school buildings open and then if they are instructed to close. So you can see those for, again, scenario 2. And as we discussed, the scenario 1 pieces of mental health would also be included in scenario 2. So given this sort of draft final copy, are there other thoughts on just these first this first section on the mental and social emotional health? And just remember to raise your hand if there's any comments on these sections. Larissa, go ahead. Ooh.
I think just structuralize to make it clear, maybe add a bullet under the mental health sections that say refers to scenario 1, or just make sure that that's included in the directions for school leaders.
Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. Thanks. I will put that in there. Daphne, you're up next.
Thank you. Just a comment that the team may want to include any behavioral staff as well as mental health that the school has working with them currently.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you. Sue Smith.
Hi, thank you. Just feedback I got today was concern about financial support for the districts for increasing the resources in the school setting for because we're just going to need more resources, especially when we do go back into the school setting, and also if we do, close again. So just financial support, is there any out there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know we've discussed the finance and sort of economic piece in some of our past meetings, and that keeps coming up. And I think that is something that DOE and the districts between CARES money and some other funding have to discuss, because I think you're right. We recognize some of this is going to cost money. So I will make another note in there just that we want to make sure we're sort of putting out there what that means. Anyone else around these things? I don't see any other hands up. All right, Patches, I think we can scroll down a bit to the safety protocols.
Thanks, Megan. The first protocol we're going to review is spacing and movement. As you've had the time to review this prior to today, is there anything that we've missed that should have been captured, anything that we need to add?
Daphne, is your hand up again or still up from before?
Sorry, I thought I had put it down.
No worries. And Larissa, I assume your hand, I think yours went down and then back up, so I think yours is up.
Yes, I think just for that last bullet, maybe adding as able around the floor tape or other markers, just consistent with the other language in the spacing and movement.
Thank you. I made a note.
Sue, is your hand still up from before? Oh, maybe it's back down. Okay, any other comments around that? I don't see any other hands over here, Mike. You guys are making this easy on us. All right, I shouldn't say that. All right, oh wait, Dr. Santiago, I think your hand is also up.
We mentioned when we were talking about this that maybe an option would be that the teacher would rotate instead of the student. That will, and I don't see that there. It was mentioned because that way it'll be less cleaning, less traffic in the hallways and things like that. That was out of the I don't know if it was, because I know we mentioned it once. Thank you.
Okay, I made a note of that also. Thank you.
Hey, Michael, this is Mario. I was just going to reflect for the committee's note. I think that recommendation actually does appear in the academic section. I know we're only reviewing the kind of safety protocols tonight, but that recommendation actually is in the final document. We're just not reviewing that here in this subcommittee.
Thank you for the clarification, Mario.
Stacy, go ahead.
I put it back down. I was, we had kind of discussed it before, how difficult that would be at the high school level with, you know, the different classes that different children take. And so it would be really hard to find one teacher to teach multiple subjects, and it's just not as feasible in the high school, at the high school level, but we discussed that before.
Thank you.
I don't see another hand, so let's scroll to the screening student section. I know this is one we had a lot of feedback on when we actually did this section, so if folks want to take a look at this. Sue, go ahead.
Thank you. Just in relation to the students entering the building in just two places, I think that should be left up to the buildings, because there's many buildings in our district, in our state, that could have access to more entry at more than two doors, depending on how their building is laid out. I'm just afraid if we say they can only enter in two places, that everybody will be like, oh, they can only enter in two places. Just because, like, I can think of buildings where they have, say, the sixth floor is on the, or sixth grade is on this end, seventh grade's on the other end, where the students could go around to those doors, which would decrease traffic in the building and in the hallways. And then the other was temperature taking. I know that we have in there recommended for parents to take it home, but if anything comes out where temperatures will be needed to be taken when students arrive at school, we would need to have students coming in more than one building. And the other would be the training. The nurses would need to do training for staff to do temperature checks and just to be mindful because, you know, this would be a kind of a mass temperature check where students come in and if their temp's elevated, they would be sent probably to the nurse's office or to another area in the building for an assessment. So people, it doesn't necessarily need to be the nurse that does the temperature check, but the nurses will need to do that training.
Two good points, Sue. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Just to clarify, because I'm going to try to write this sort of in an organized fashion. It sounds like what you're saying is you think that should read that the building should have to have designated access points, but perhaps not two.
Yes, just so that people, you know, because sometimes people will say, oh, they said two. Well, we only can do two, but we need to have multiple entry depending on how your building is laid out. Because they're going to come in the morning, but they're not going to be leaving, and then they'll be leaving kind of the same way out those same doors.
All right, thank you. I don't see any, oh, wait, Dr. Fitzgerald, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
You're muted, Dr. Fitzgerald.
Am I unmuted?
There you go.
Am I good now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah.
I've done too many of these. I'm going to echo what Sue just said. I was thinking about a school with 2,200 in it, a high school, and I'm concerned that if you're funneling students into two particular spots, that might not be the best as far as spreading the disease. So I look at it as just let the schools designate which areas students can enter from or to, and which ones they should exit from. And I think it give us that flexibility would probably work a lot better. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fitzgerald.
Okay. Senator Sturgeon, I saw you typed in a comment, but anything particular that you want to make sure is said during this meeting about the classroom changes that you typed in? Okay. I'm just trying to say, I don't see any other hands. Okay, I think I don't see any other hands from Patches, so I think we can move forward.
Thanks, Megan. So our next section is testing protocols for students and responding to positive cases. Again, is there anything that we haven't captured or that needs to be added?
Dana, go ahead.
Just a super quick addition, if we could just add something about in coordination with the Division of Public Health to the contact tracing piece. And I'll provide this all in writing, but just wanted to flag that.
Thanks, Dana.
Sue, you're next.
Hi, I just want to share that there's been a couple places where we've written that DOE and public health will do some correspondence for parents and guidelines and those kinds of things. And that is something that we are currently working on so that everybody is aware that that is in process. We already initiated a letter for parents about checking their child's temperature at home and symptom checking before they come to school for a few of our districts that we'll be doing summer school, a little bit of summer school this summer with bringing a few of our students in. So just so people are aware, we are working on letters for what to do if your child tests positive and how long they should be out and how long they should be fever free. So we are working on that to for the wellness part for our students and our families to make everybody aware. Hopefully the message will come out and every district will have the same consistent message, and that's our goal.
Thank you, sir.
I think, oh, Dr. Fitzgerald, was your hand up and then down? Don't know if you have a comment or not.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I don't see any other hands. I'll give people another second just in case. All right, let's keep rolling. So this next section is pretty short, just responding to positive tests among students and staff. I am not seeing any hands. I'll give everyone another minute just to make sure. Oh, Kristen, go ahead.
I haven't seen, I didn't, unless I missed it when I reviewed earlier, but are there health checks for staff for when they come into the building? Are they required to get a temperature check as well?
That's a good question. Mario, is that in this document? I don't recall seeing that either.
No, at this time, the staff are not recommended to go through temperature screening. And I'll actually, I will sort of note about temperature checks. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out with their recommendations earlier this week, and they actually strongly advised against temperature checks for both kids and teachers coming into school. So I think, you know, from the parental aspect, I think a lot of pediatricians in the community will take their guidance from that document. So I just throw that out as a data point.
Thank you.
Kristen, just to clarify here, you know, I know you're representing DSEA. Do you think that's something that that staff are wanting to have to do these screenings?
I guess now I'm just a little bit confused. We have guidance that recommends temperature checks for our students, but we don't have guidance that recommends a health check for our staff outside of if you aren't feeling well or if you're exhibiting some of these symptoms. I don't know if, you know, because staff can also be a carrier, what, you know, options would be available to staff that would be willing to be tested, to go through a health check, you know, what type of guidance, or if the districts have discussed this locally as well, if they intend to do anything as far as staff.
Are you recommending then that we put that on there as a recommendation?
I'd like to know what the rest of the committee thinks, but I think that there should be some level of a health check when the and I don't know, I would lean on Mario, you know, how often that would be necessary. If not every day, then every week. But it just seems if you are requiring that of the students, something similar should be perhaps required for staff. And without knowing what every single member in DSEA feels about that, I think some of them, the majority of them would want to stay as safe as possible and do what would be necessary.
Yeah, I think we should go back and look at that language, Kristen, because I think temperature checks are not recommended for students right now. So maybe we need to look at the language to see if it's unclear. But right now, it's not written that it's recommended for students.
So I think, Kristen, I think you bring up a really good point. If others have thoughts, you know, I see some other hands. I don't know if it's about that or something else. But if others have thoughts, I'm happy to hear them. I think it's a really good point because, you know, Mario just mentioned what some of the AAP guidelines are and what also some of this newer data is saying is that adults are much higher risk for spreading and carrying this. So I think that's a really important point. And I don't know exactly what it might look like. And maybe, you can check in with some of your DSEA folks to see what that might be and get it over to Mike and I by Friday. But I think that's an excellent point. That's not in here. I am going to go to Senator Del Colo, and then if others have comments on that, we can certainly go back.
Thank you. So on the issue of some type of check for staff, I know that there are some states that have directions generally that say you have to have some sort of protocol in place to screen people when they're coming into the job place. So that's from like an executive order level. So I don't know why, from a health standpoint, that would be demonstrably different for some workplaces and not others. And since it seems to me that that is the demographic that's most likely to spread the disease, that we're concerned about containing, that needs to be evaluated. I remember there being a discussion before about whether or not folks would be able to do testing at home and empowering families that might not be able to so that they could. But my question would be, why is from the organization, I think it was the American, I can't remember the acronym, but the pediatric folks, like what is the basis behind that recommendation? To me, knowing that a data point is there is less relevant than understanding the meat and potatoes behind it. So I think we would want to know that to determine whether that's the right call for Delaware for what this committee is doing. But to me, this also raises the other question, which is the other point that I wanted to ask, which is that in this section of responding to positive tests among staff and students, I appreciate the presence of cleaning and other things, but how will folks, and I know that there's some guidance that was just put out about contact tracing. I don't know if that overlaps with that guidance, but and is it contemplated that districts or public health folks would advise someone, hey, you may have been exposed and here's what you can do to be safe? Just from an informational standpoint, that's my question, and whether that is going to be something that's just totally dealt with from the DPH level, or if there's any role that a district has in that, and if so, if it should be in this recommendation.
Mary, you want to help us out with this one?
Sure. So we can unpack those sort of bit by bit, sir. So about your point about staff.
But there are some, for whatever reason, that we are unable to connect with, and really does emphasize.
So that's a good point, that it may be worth having similar language, that we have for students. I think you're right that there are some states that are recommending that teachers should undergo daily temperature checks on their way in. There's others who don't. I think that's really a Delaware specific question about whether that's what you all would want. I have my opinions as a physician, but that's for the committee to decide, not for me. So that's, I think on the issue of the staff, the other question that you raised about the AAP, or the American Academy of Pediatrics, and whether the data point about temperature checks is the right one. I think that's certainly a valid concern. I think, we can certainly pull the primary literature on that to take a look. I think my point in bringing it up was that I think when parents ask their pediatricians what they would do or what they would recommend, I think that's going to be one of the main sources of information that they'll go to, because it's just generally a professional body that most pediatricians, I think, look to for information. But it's always worth getting, second opinions and second thoughts. And then I'm sorry, I missed your last question, sir.
The last question was about the response and whether there's, I know, for example, that there are some employers that have processes in place. Of course, these aren't mandated, but, having reviewed at this point dozens and dozens of positive test response protocols, there are definitely some employers that provide people with advisements. Hey, you may have been exposed, or you may have been around someone who was exposed. here
Yeah.
are the things you can do to kind of be safe for your loved ones at home. You know, not to draw a controversial analog, but I know that there was a big dust up in Pennsylvania, I believe it was, about how certain people tested positive and no one was alerted. And there were some really strong reactions about, well, why wouldn't you tell me? You know,
Sure.
I've been around X, Y, and Z person and I want to keep them safe. I know for me, if I were to find out that I had been around someone who perhaps was positive, I'd err on the side of caution to protect my loved ones and so forth. So I just wondered whether that function was just handled by DPH or if there's a role that the district has in that in the context of these recommendations.
Yeah, I believe in the document, if not in this section, in one of the other sections, there's a recommendation that if there is a positive case, the school is supposed to notify parents to that effect. But I think your question about the role of contact tracing and sort of how that would work, I think in most states I've seen it work primarily through DPH because there's a question of whether you want your education department, sort of doing a non-traditional role, but that's, again, for the subcommittee to decide, not for me. I think historically it's been a DPH responsibility.
Okay. So what I'm hearing here is that we need to address, no matter what, we need to address this concept that we're not mentioning staff checks at all in any way. And Senator Duckel, I think you have a good point that, all of our businesses, healthcare systems, et cetera, are screening. So I think we at least need to stick it in there. And certainly as folks have thoughts from educators or other people on what they think is feasible, let us know. Sue Smith, I think you are next.
I just wanted to share that we have been doing when this first started for any staff that came into our building, they had to complete an online survey, self-survey. They were recommended to check their temperature at home and symptoms. And if they had any of those symptoms, it was requested not to come into the building. And that was, I'm pretty sure, and Dana may be able to speak to this, I think it was in coordination with public health, exactly how to do that survey. And it was an online survey. And then once we went to the next phase, the staff did not have to complete it, but they were still encouraged to look at those symptoms and if they had any of them and if they had a temperature to not to come into the building. So, when you look at adults, we're kind of hoping that they will self-monitor themselves with knowing what the signs and symptoms are and then if they're ill and those kinds of things. And then that kind of falls into the attendance issue of changing attendance policies for fear that because people only have so many days for attendance and COVID could take them out for 14 days, it's kind of a twofold thing. People are going to come not to school not feeling well because of their attendance, but we still need to encourage people to realize that this is very contagious. And if you have any of these symptoms, you should definitely stay home. So it's kind of a catch-22. And the other, back to the question about notifying people if they've been exposed or whatever, or they were in the classroom or a teacher positive. I think that will be where those letters come from that the schools can send out. Public health will be notified, and then public health will hopefully do contact tracing like they do with TB. If somebody's positive with TB, public health does that contact tracing. So I think that we're all very invested in making sure that everyone knows that they've been possibly around someone that's positive or symptomatic, and everybody needs to be mindful of their own symptoms, their own body, who they're around, the social distancing and wearing a mask. So it's just really important that we're just not focused on the students, but the staff too, to realize that everybody needs to self-monitor.
Thanks, Sue. I don't see any other hands on this one. I'll give people just one more second in case, Representative Smith. Oh, is that, or is it Sue Smith? I don't know. Does Smith has a hand up? Sue Smith just talked. Okay. And then Senator Ducolo, did you mean to put your hand back up or just not put it down?
I think I had forgotten to put it down. I would just emphasize just briefly that I think that there are, different categories of staff that we have to keep in mind. So it's not just the staff members that are interacting with students. There are also custodial staff, and there are also mechanics and people who are, skilled craftspeople working in our schools. So there's a whole universe out there. And, I'm not saying that what's necessarily correct for a teacher would be right for all other staff or what have you, but that's just something to keep in mind as we consider how to approach the question of how we support folks to help them, I guess, be empowered to make the right calls.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we are going to move on. I'll hand it back over to Mike for a bit for the dining, gathering, extracurricular activities.
Thank you, Megan. Again, is there anything here that we haven't captured that needs to be added? And as you peruse that, I have a question for Mario. An area that's come up this week is marching band, band, and chorus. Where does that fit into this? And does that need a little, do we need some language around that?
So right now, Michael, there's no specific language in the document about band activities or theater activities. I think what it says is that for extracurricular activities, they can continue as long as a mask is in use. So that's what it's stated currently. I will leave it to the committee to decide whether they want to amend that.
I think is there also something in here, if I'm not mistaken, about not having groups over 50, right? So I guess it also depends on the number of students in those bands, choirs, any of those things. Okay. Susan Habistro, go ahead.
Yes, under the dining, the third bullet, it talks about if possible, students should bring food from home. We're just a little concerned with that, where it actually, where we're providing meals at schools now, that it may be a burden for families if they feel like they should bring the food from home. So I'm not exactly sure why it was in there. So I would recommend that it would come out, but that would be the recommendation.
Yeah, I'll just, it was included initially because there was a question about whether disease could be transmitted by food. So it was meant to say, for folks who have allergies or special, food requirements, that they could still continue to bring their food without risk of spreading disease, but just a point of clarification.
Thanks, Mario. So it sounds like, Susan, you think that probably needs to come out given how many students we provide meals for in school.
I would recommend that, or be reworded about allergies or something to that effect, that you can continue, but maybe it's just the wording where it says should bring, as opposed to our school nutrition programs do excellent work.
Thank you. Stacy, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we do need some specific clarification as far as band is concerned. Even if we weren't doing the extracurricular activities with sporting events and football games where the band would be present there, they still have band class that is part of the curriculum. And some of those band classes can be upwards of 50 kids in a class, believe it or not. So if we're looking at, 50 people and wearing a mask, obviously they're not going to wear a mask and play an instrument. So I think we need some specific language or recommendations as far as that's concerned.
Thank you. Dr. Fitzgerald.
Yes, that was my concern, and I know I had brought that up with Mike earlier in the week, that we spent a lot of time on athletics. But one of the things that we really didn't discuss and set a path forward was, what do we do with, you've got marching band, you've got concert band, you have a variety of choruses, and I know that parents want to know some direction, and I also know that schools are going to want some direction. Marching band, perhaps we can spread them out across a football field or a soccer field for that matter, and we can make that work, but at what point do we say we're not going to be able to provide these options for our children, and we need to start planning or looking at different things, because singing with a mask on or playing an instrument with a mask on is pretty prohibitive.
So if I could just add one thing here, Megan, when we originally wrote the document, there was not clear guidance as far as scientific data goes about whether playing in band is safe. I think there were some studies that showed that choir and some of those things had shown spread in community settings. But to the best of my knowledge, there still isn't any data that shows whether or not those things are safe. And I think it's a little bit different than some of the athletic associations that have given guidance about under what criteria they recommend for athletics to continue. But I have, to the best of my knowledge, have not seen anything about similar guidance for band or something like that. So I think if the committee wants to do that, we probably have to, sort of spell out exactly what that is here, because I don't think there's a body of evidence to rely on.
I would agree. I know that the NFHS is going to do a study on aerosol spraying when it comes to band and to chorus. And that study, hopefully they'll have something in August, and that might be a time to revisit it. But I do think that it's something that we should at least list as something that's under consideration so that people know that it's still being considered and there's going to be a plan as we move forward. Because I'd hate to see it in different schools and people handling it differently when without any guidance whatsoever.
Hey, Dana, I'd hate to put you on the spot. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. My hand was up anyway. I put in the chat box the guidance that is available currently about I think it's band. Hold on. It's band and yelling and singing. So I put that in the chat.
Thanks, Dana.
I don't see any other hands, Mike.
Okay.
So, sorry, Megan, if I could just say one thing, as I read through this guidance, that is from the Division of Public Health, the guidance says that face coverings, that these activities should only continue if face coverings are in use. So I know folks probably want a chance to read these and, sort of digest that a little bit, but, in the interest of public comment and then sort of know what is out there. I want to make sure that people know that that's what the guidance says.
Thanks, Mario.
Thank you.
So if there aren't any other hands, maybe we can move on to the next section, athletics. We'll just have to do some homework on that and review what you sent us, Dana. So this next section is athletics. Is there anything that we haven't captured and that we need to add?
Dana?
I would just add a very, very small point, but just something about in compliance or in alignment with DIAA regulations and the return to play guidance from the public health department or from Division of Public Health in the governor's office.
Thanks, Dana.
I don't see any other hands. Any other comments on the athletics piece? All right, we will keep on going to PPE and hygiene. And as Mike said, I know that we're still getting a lot of public comment and folks have different opinions of this piece. Daphne, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a quick comment about the word privacy. I would recommend removing that particular word. We talked a couple times about the screen isn't to ensure the privacy of the students, protect from particles. So barrier screen, clear, plastic, whatever else we can say. might describe better what we're talking about. The teachers still want to be able to see their students.
Thank you. Great point. Sue Smith, go ahead.
Just a couple of things where it has where all staff and students should wear facial coverings at all times. You know, when you look at the regular recommendations from public health, that I think that's going to come up a question because 3 to 12 is highly recommended and 13 is required. Age of 13 is required. I don't know what kind of feedback we're going to get from families. The other is the gloves are not required except for custodial staff or teacher cleaning. Gloves, you know, we need to look at gloves are required for staff that may be assisting students with personal care. So it's kind of, you know, two things. And then the other is depending on, like, if you have students that have, say, suctioning or a vent or a trach or those kinds of things, we may need to look at it. And this may be something that comes directly from school nurse recommendation, DOE and public health, is when PPE should be the mask, the face shield or goggles, a gown, gloves. But I think definitely for staff, the initial should be gloves should be worn if, you know, assisting students with personal care, because we have a lot of our staff that do assist students with personal care. So two things, the mask with the DPH recommendations, which I've gotten feedback on that, and then the other, the gloves.
Thank you. I'll add both of those things in here. Oops, we're echoing a bit there. Okay. Anyone? Oh, Dr. Fitzgerald, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a problem with the all staff and students should wear facial coverings at all times. I just don't, I mentioned this before. I don't know how I can enforce that at a high school level. I agree with what Sue said with regard to the guidance that we received earlier. It's conflicting when we hear CDC and DPH tell us one thing and now we're going to institute another. But I just want to be really clear and careful that if we put that in, what is a principal to do? What is a teacher to do if a student is not wearing a facial covering? How are we supposed to react? And I don't believe that this should ever become a disciplinary issue if where we would exclude a student because they don't have a facial covering. So I'm always reluctant to put something in that is almost impossible to enforce. While I see the value in it, especially for teachers and staff to wear it, I stay up nights trying to figure out how to tell my principals to enforce that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fitzgerald. It sounds like this is something we need to sort of continue to flush out. I hear the public health recs and that we might want to stick with that, but I also do hear you about the piece of how do we enforce, and perhaps that's a conversation we need to have with the academic folks as we talk about, you know, guidance and IEPs and some of those things as well. So we will certainly keep that, you know, on our radar. And I have written down sort of your feedback specifically around because I'm with you here as a psychologist. I don't want this to become a discipline issue. I also work for a healthcare system and know how important they are. So I think, you know, I think a lot of us are in the same position you are with feeling a little bit torn on this one, but I think it's something we need to continue to discuss. And Mike and I can certainly, you know, bring that back, those concerns back to DPH and GOE, and continue to make sure that is not just dropped and that we keep talking about how that works.
Thank you.
Sue, I think back to you if you have your hand up still.
Yes, and the other concern is the students or staff that may not be able to wear a mask. If they can wear a face shield, you know, what would that be? Maintaining the social distancing, those kinds of things, because we do have a large population of students that are not going to be able to wear a mask. Maybe they could wear a face shield, even though the face shield is more for droplets, but there's more research coming out that's saying the face shield is okay, better than not wearing anything at all. So it's kind of a controversy. The other feedback is where if a parent doesn't want their child to come to school because not everybody's wearing a mask, we need to be able to provide virtual learning for those if everybody's coming back to school, kind of thing, is giving options for families, because we are going to have some families that are going to want everybody in their child's class wearing a mask when it's either recommended or not recommended. And it's just hard to put on there that all students must, wear a mask when you're going to have people that aren't. And like we say, we don't want it a discipline issue, but we need to have I just don't think that this is going to be a perfect answer to this. I just don't think it is, because things keep changing all the time. But we need to look at those different options and those different concerns that families are going to give us.
Thanks, Sue. I'm certainly writing down all the notes you all are talking about, and hopefully we can continue to flush that piece out some more. Stacy, go ahead.
Is it reasonable that once students are seated and they're 6 feet apart, that they can remove the mask after they've passed through the hallway or entered the classroom, like once they're distancing? Is that reasonable?
I'm going to defer to Mario, but I'll tell you the research that comes out in the past couple of weeks have said once you are inside in the same room, even with distancing, there is some concern about disease spread. That has been, in the news a lot with indoor restaurants and things like that. I think there is also some research that says it doesn't seem to be spreading as much in school. So I think it's another one of those things where I don't know how much data and if it's strong enough data to suggest that. Mario, I'll kick to you to see if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's a little bit of the unknown there. I mean, I think the AAP came out and felt like masks were still necessary indoors, even when kids were 6 feet apart. But it's, to your point, Stacey, I think it's the unknown, right? I mean, nobody knows the absolute true answer to that. And so the question is whether you err on the side of, more safety, or do you say we want to see what happens? And I certainly can't make the answer for the subcommittee here, but that's what the data says.
Again, I think that's still a discussion we can sort of have, right? And if folks want that in this document, that's something to discuss. Kristen, go ahead.
I was just curious if other states have made the recommendation to require masks of students and teachers throughout the day.
I'll just say, Kristen, I think it is spanning a little bit. So I'll say, actually, I think this guidance says that they should wear facial coverings, not that they must. But I think to your point, there's a question of what the enforcement mechanism looks like there, and that's for DOE to decide. But on the question of whether other states are doing it, I know Michigan released their guidance today and said that they are in certain phases. I know other states have said that they are recommending that they be worn, and then others are not. I think it's all over the place.
Okay, no other hands for now on that one. Mike, I'll hand back over to you. Oh, sorry, Senator Del Colo, go ahead. Sorry, Mike.
Thanks, Megan. So I just wanted to, consistent with what I suggested, that should be our guiding light before, understanding that there are challenges with all of this. And I've even brought up concerns about funding and cost and how a lot of this will be effectuated. But time and time again, we come back to the question of what is the most proper course given the data that we have? What is the best thing that we can do in light of science? So even if things are challenging, to me, if there's a bias that we should have, it should be in favor of that guiding principle. And I'd rather have a recommendation be there that is difficult to enforce, so at least it's clear, like, people looked at this is the proper thing that we think should be done based upon whatever the data is. And how that plays out, it plays out however it will play out, because obviously each district has its own ability to indicate the way it'll go, and that's a purview of the school board. But I do think, from what I understand our mission to be, and in light of all the discussions we've had up until this point on many very challenging topics, we owe it to the people of the state to say, here is what the recommendation is from that perspective, because that's the task of our subcommittee. And there's definitely other committees and other discussions that have to be had around the question of funding and supports for some of these things, and the use of resources in the CARES Act money that the state now has, and how to practically implement this stuff. That definitely has to be fleshed out, and we have to support that. But if there's clear science on something throughout all of this that dictates that somebody won't possibly get sick and have all of the terrible things that could happen from that, then I just want us to keep that in mind.
So, Megan, if I could just highlight 2 data points. I'm sorry to keep interjecting. I know you're asking about some of the data, Senator. So I will say there were 2 studies that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine this past week that looked at the inflammatory syndrome in kids, essentially, there in the Northeast. And they had a couple of interesting data points. So they looked at 300 cases of those kids who developed the multisystem inflammatory syndrome. And what they found was that the attack rate, or the likelihood of kids developing symptomatic COVID, was about 22 kids out of every 100,000 cases in persons under 21 years old, and about 2 of those developed the multisystem inflammatory syndrome. So you can extrapolate that to the number of students in Delaware, and get some idea of how many folks you can expect to get clinically symptomatic and then develop multisystem inflammatory disease. But again, that's 300 students in the Northeast, but it's the best US data that we have.
Thanks, Mario. Okay, Mike, I'm going to hand back over to you for the cleaning, I think.
Thank you. Before we start cleaning, I just want to give a little time check to the committee. It's 5:57. We have half hour. And I know this is a great discussion, and it's robust, and it's on a topic that we really haven't been able to get through most of scenario 2, but I just want to just throw that out there. The next area we're going to be reviewing is cleaning. Again, is there anything that we haven't captured or that needs to be added?
Kristen, go ahead. Kristen, you can go.
Or that
Kristen, you can go ahead.
Are there other hands up?
Mike, can you hear me?
I hear you. Yeah. Seems like Kristen was actually. Kristen was actually. Are there other hands that are raised?
Yes.
Daphne.
Thank you. I just want to go back to what was discussed before. And I know that, we have talked before about even if kids aren't, if there aren't high number of kids who get sick from contracting the virus, that they can be carriers and take it home to other vulnerable populations. So I just want us to keep that in mind. And I'm also in favor of what Senator Del Colo was talking about in regard to, our primary consideration is to keep our kids and our staff and our community safe. So I just wanted to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Daphne.
Senator Del Colo, I'm not sure if your hand is, oh, nope, you put your hand down.
Sometimes I forget to.
No worries. I don't see any other hands. I'll give everyone one more second. All right, Mike, I think we can move on to busing. Oh, sorry, Stacy, go ahead. I missed you.
Oh, sorry. Guys, just as far as cleaning, it kind of fits into this category, or the personal protective equipment. The cleaning of masks, we may need some recommendations or some guidance for students and families on how often to wash, masks, or because they may not all be buying a reusable mask that they throw away and get a new one every day. That's pretty costly for a family. So if they're using one that can be reused, we may need some guidance on how often to wash those and how to wash those effectively.
Great point, Stacy.
Thanks, Stacy. I don't see any other hands on the. Can you scroll down to busing and student transportation one? Let folks look at that for a minute and see if there's any other hands. Larissa, go ahead.
Thank you. I do think that whatever's decided, whether we go with the language of strongly encourage regarding facial coverings, this section should mirror what we're saying in the school. This doesn't reference students at all as far as them wearing facial coverings. It just references bus drivers and bus aides. So whatever that final language is should be mirrored in this section as well.
Good catch. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Any other thoughts on this busing and student transportation? All right, we're going to keep going.
Okay, the next area is the medically vulnerable students and staff. Is there anything that hasn't been captured or anything that we need to add?
Sue's hand is up.
Sue?
Sorry, I just wanted to back with buses. Should we make a recommendation that students should make sure that they're either washing their hands or using hand sanitizer before they arrive on the bus in the morning and like in the afternoon before they go home? Should we think about that just to encourage that to help with the bus? Because I don't know that we're going to be able to put hand sanitizers on the school bus, even though we have been looking into that, but maybe a recommendation to families for that.
Really good point.
Sure, I can make a note of that. Okay, Daphne, I think, is next.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo what someone said earlier. I think it was Sue about families needing options. And in this particular scenario too, sorry, a lot of feedback going on. This scenario
Can everyone else mute themselves?
We did have a bullet in there before that is not in there any longer, that kind of made it clear who has the, I think it said before, parents or guardians may elect to keep children with underlying health conditions home and pursue other virtual learning. And that, I don't think that bullet is still in here. Is that correct? I'm not sure what happened, but what is left is also not very clear of who gets to make that final decision. And, you know, depending on what's going on and the other pieces of scenario 2 that we are requiring, this is where families are saying they really need some say in how to keep their kids safe and healthy, especially given, you know, medically fragile kids, and especially given their very unique and health challenges that they may have to address. So I just recommend put that bullet back in there or make very clear what is the process, how that is determined.
Yep, definitely that exact bullet moved over to the academic section.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. It just seemed to disappear.
Thanks,
Oh, we have
Mario.
Mario. Thanks, Mario. I do not see other hands. All right. So in terms of scenario 2, if people continue to have thoughts, you know, do try to get them to us as soon as you can for the draft recommendations, and we will move on to scenario 3. So we'll start again with the mental and social emotional health piece. Daphne, I'm not sure if your hand is back up
Yeah.
or if it's still up from before.
No,
Okay,
it's
awesome. Go ahead.
back up. Actually, before you switched over, I just wanted to make sure somebody
Oh, go
somewhere is addressing the attendance policies. I know it was mentioned today, it was mentioned in previous meetings about, people being concerned about truancy or attendance, other attendance rules when considering staying home if there's cause for concern. So we continue to talk about that. I don't see it in our particular scenarios. I don't know if it's in one of the other groups that is addressing that, but we need to make sure that we address, the attendance policies in our state.
I believe it
Thank
is in one of the
you.
other
Mario-
sections.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it is in one of the other sections, Daphne, but we'll make note of it here to make sure that it gets covered.
Thanks, Daphne, and thanks, Mario. Sue, go ahead.
I also think that this was moved to, I'm not sure where I read it, but the information to parents as soon as we have a plan of in case school closed, what they expect kind of thing, so that it's not kind of blindsided like we were in March, so that a plan is communicated out statewide. If your district closed or your building closes, this is what you can expect. It'll be possibly closed for this long, or we're going to do virtual or whatever. But I think it's really important that we have a communication plan to our families and to our staff of what could happen if we do need to close. And also for families, what resources are available and what resources that they need to help them during closure. Because a lot of times some families might say, well, we were able to get internet last time, but we don't have it this time, and giving them what's out there and what's available in the community. So I just think it's a big communication tool for all three scenarios to let families know this is what you can expect.
Yep, I know for sure that that's in both in the academics and the operations section, Sue. It's definitely covered.
Thanks, Mario. Any other thoughts around this mental and social emotional health? All right, we are going to keep moving on then. These are, I think, next few are pretty simple for us.
Patches, if you could bump up as many as we can fit on the screen, that's perfect. So if we could look at those three protocols, or if you could bump down just one more. I'm sorry, the other way. If we could just stop right, yeah, perfect. If we could just take this as a group, the spacing and movement, screening of students, dining and gathering, anything that there's nothing there since it's scenario 3, but is there anything that should be added? If not, can we bump down a little further, Patches? Perfect. How about the next 4? Athletics, PPE, cleaning, busing, and medically vulnerable.
Sue Smith, go ahead.
Sorry. Just a thought, if buildings are closed, how we can stay in contact with our students or our families that maybe a child is ill or a family member is ill, so that we can help to keep track of that and also help public health with the tracking of that. So a communication recommendation that families, let us know when somebody's sick, but we also know in the building that somebody is sick and what's happening or who they are. So we'd have to have that process probably in place with who's the contact person in the building, so that it could be followed up with public health, something along that line.
Good point, Sue.
Thanks, Sue. I think that's a great point. If they're going to their physicians and letting you all know in the schools, there has to be some way to have that communication. I do not see any other hands.
Should we move towards scenario 1?
Sure. Yeah, we can Patches, if you want to just go back up to scenario 1, you know, I know we've spent a lot of time reviewing this already, but just wanted to see if anyone has other thoughts. So certainly, I think we probably won't spend as much time going through every single section of this, but we'll have Patches kind of scroll through at least each section and just stop briefly. I know a lot of the comments around here was communication, so there is now a whole communication bullet about making sure that partners and DPH, DOE are getting information out to parents. All right, I do not see any hands, so I think we can keep scrolling. Oh, Sue Smith, sorry, I missed you for a sec.
That's okay. Just in this one is that if there's no community spread and we're getting close to having a vaccine, preparation for planning for our schools to have mass vaccination clinics in our schools, will it be thoughts of, will it be mandatory, or will parents be able to opt out with religious or immunocompromised reasoning, but a plan so that the schools will know, like when we did H1N1, it was like, okay, we're going to do this in the schools, and it was a quick process. So maybe thinking about a plan of immunization when a vaccine becomes available, how we can coordinate that in the school setting. And then the other was, I had a suggestion about, even though there's no restrictions on facing forward in the classrooms, because there's not an immunization and because there's not a true treatment right now, is maybe we need to consider to help decrease the spread is to have students facing forward and still some separation so that desks aren't real close to each other, to promote the not sharing and those kinds of things, because the virus is still here. It's just that our numbers aren't up, but we still need to be proactive in keeping everyone safe and healthy as best as we can, without saying, okay, you can go to your small groups and you can do this and face each other, because we do see that in the flu system, when it's flu time, that kids sitting across from each other do get sick at the same time. So maybe we need to just think about a few of those things for prevention, even though there's no huge, large community spread.
Thanks, Sue. And Patrick, you can scroll down a bit. You can keep on going down a little further. So it sounds like, Sue, you're saying in these spacing and movement protocols, you just think we have to have some of those prevention pieces in. So I'll note those things to add there.
I do. I think it's important that we continue to work on prevention to decrease the number of spread, and also with the staff, even if nobody's wearing a mask, still keep that social isolation and those kinds of things in the forefront.
I do not see any other hands. Right now. So I noted those in there. So we can maybe scroll down a little bit further, Patches, here for the testing for students responding to positive cases, to see if folks have any ideas. Maybe up a little bit, sorry. There we go. So any comments on this, especially given what, Sue, you're saying here about prevention work? I do not see any hands still. You can keep on scrolling. Any comments here among the responding to positive cases or any of these dining or gathering pieces? still not seeing any hands, so we can keep on going to athletics. Daphne, go ahead.
Not really about the particular section that we're on, but in general, will the community know which scenario we are enacting? So we're going to be in scenario 1, 2, or 3. Is there some kind of method to let the families know, okay, we're utilizing the scenario 1 protocol right now so that they can be fully informed and prepared for whatever is going to happen or is not going to happen? I just thought of that.
Mike, what is, I'll refer or Mario to one of you to see what the plan is for that.
Yeah, I would expect that DOE would release that publicly, but I defer to Michael about DOE operations.
I don't know the direct answer to that. I'm assuming we will be doing that in coordination with DPH and determining what scenario we're in.
Just that I think families would want to know which scenario we are in, not, necessarily who's going to decide which one we're in, but whatever it is decided that we are in, that's communicated with the community. And I'm sure teachers would want to know. I think families will definitely want to know. They can read the protocol and understand what would or would not be happening during that time then.
Daphne, I'll be sure to communicate that. An effective communication plan would have to be rolled out with this document also. It's a great point, and I'll be sure to pass that along.
Yeah, I think the one other thing I'll add, Daphne, is that the data about which scenario we're in is in the public documents, so that are not spread we've talked about. And my guess is that as we get closer and as we release these, we'll be also talking to that. That's also publicly available information. So that data is actually available publicly daily. So I think we can sort of probably steer families in the direction based on what that is July 13th and beyond.
Okay, thank you. I think some families may not understand, tying it to some extraneous information they'd want to hear directly from the school system. We are following scenario 1 protocol because it would be very clear what that means to them, rather than having to go look somewhere else and remember tying that to something else. To be very clear and communicate, the schools are now operating under this protocol.
Sure. Okay, let's keep scrolling down. I don't see any other hands up for PPE. Any concerns about the cleaning piece? Still don't see any hands up. Okay, how about busing? No hands. All right, last section, the medically vulnerable populations. I will give Daphne, go ahead.
Thank you. Just the similar question, who is the ultimate decision maker in this case? Was that moved to another work group also? Or, well, I guess there's,
you mean of which
No, I don't think the ultimate. I think the ultimate decision maker, Daphne, is the parents.
Okay.
Right. I don't think that recommendation is moved anywhere else. But I think in the document it says parents and students should decide, in conjunction with their healthcare provider.
Well, just to be clear, it says that they are encouraged to have discussions with the healthcare provider to determine their risk and determine whether it's safe. It doesn't then actually clarify that they can elect to not participate in in-person schooling. So if that's what intended, you might want to make that language a little stronger to clearly communicate that. Otherwise, it doesn't exactly say how that will happen.
Okay. I noted that as well. So just be more clear about that, Rec. Okay, any other hands up? I don't see anyone else. All right, Patrick, can you pull back up the slide that talks about our next steps? Awesome. So as Mike said, thank you all again. We really appreciate it. In the next couple of days, we certainly will continue to welcome your feedback. If there is certain specific language, wording that you think is important, please send our way. Again, as Mike said, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244. But after tonight, after this meeting, we are going to make the final edits to the work. Again, we would like you to send us anything our way this week and forward to the secretary for her review. Each group's final document is going to be posted on the public website once we have incorporated the rest of our edits, and the recommendations are going to be used to support the development of the full school reopening guidance. And as Mike mentioned earlier tonight, that will be released the week of July 13th. We certainly appreciate all of your work, all of your help. I will give just one more minute to see if there's any hands up for any other general questions for myself, Mike, or Mario. And if not, again, we welcome any further feedback over the next few days. And Mike, Mario, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. I don't see any other hands up.
I echo your comments. Thank you, everyone, for all your hard work and dedication to this work.
Yeah, likewise, I would just say thanks for letting me join the group.
All right, thanks, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll look forward to hearing from you on all of your comments.
Thank you.